Hello and welcome to Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. This is part 3 of my videos on genealogy. In this video, I'm going to address the question of researching your Irish roots. So, you have this question: where did my Irish ancestors come from? You know they came from Ireland, but you don't know where. Specifically, you don't know what county in Ireland they came from. Is there a way for you to find out where? Well, there is. It can be a very tough search, and not everybody can find the county that their Irish ancestors are from, but some can, and it can happen for you. So, um, in terms of Ireland, Ireland's broken up into counties. So the usual question is, what county did your ancestor come from? Some people have multiple family lines from Ireland, and you may want to know where each line came from. And the real gold nugget uh, at the end of the rainbow would be knowing exactly where in the county your relatives came from. Um, and I guess with the hypothetical that you might visit Ireland and visit the uh, the ancestral home of your particular family. So one thing you shouldn't do is rely on one of these commercial maps of Ireland that have the surnames written in them, giving the ancestral homes of the different surnames. Um, while that map is technically correct, it has to do with the origin of the surname, and that could have been 1,000 years ago. And you're not really interested in that. You're interested more specifically in where your direct ancestors came from, and they may or may not have come from the same county where your surname originated in Ireland 1,000 years ago. So, uh, I'm not talking about looking at one of these maps. You can feel free to do that, but that's not going to tell you where your great grandmother came from. Uh, Ireland has a lot of categories for the names of places. First, there are the ancient um, provinces. There are 4 provinces in Ireland. They are Ulster, Munster, Leinster, and Connaught. These names aren't used much today in Ireland, but back in the distant past, they were ruled by different clans. Each province is divided into counties. There are 9 counties in Ulster. 6 of them are in Northern Ireland, and 3 of them are in the south. The northern counties are Antrim, Down, Armagh, Londonderry, Fermanagh, and Tyrone. The 3 in the south are Donegal, Monaghan, and Cavan. The counties are the largest administrative areas in government terms in Ireland. A long time ago, counties were subdivided into baronies, a term not used now in Ireland, but each barony would have been ruled by a tribal baron. Baronies were further divided into parishes. A parish was really and still is an ecclesiastical unit. And in days gone by, the parish also came to be adopted as a civil administrative area. So a parish is an area which would have come under the jurisdiction of a parish church, which was always the established church, which because Ireland was ruled from England, that would mean the Anglican Church, which they call the Church of Ireland. The parishes were further subdivided into townlands. The townland is a unique feature in Ireland and is one of the most ancient divisions in the country. The origins of the townland remain obscure, but are undoubtedly of great antiquity, much older than parishes and counties. A densely populated townland could grow into a village. However, only the Queen was allowed to name a new city in Northern Ireland or in the old Ireland before it was before the Revolution, and I think it was 1921. Townlands can be very small, and the smallest could be a quarter-mile square, and it might consist of 20 tiny fields and 3 houses. However, the boundaries of townlands never change. So those are some of the terms you may come across in researching the different areas of Ireland. And different data collections may use these different geographical names and area names of these particular areas. So it's good that you would know about them. So how would you find your Irish roots? Well, the first thing you should do is make a family tree and find all the branches that could end up with Irish ancestry. Find the people on your family tree that are closest to the arrival of your ancestors in Ireland. Perhaps your ancestor, the very ancestor who was born in Ireland, and research that person using Irish records to see if you can locate where they came from. The censuses, like the U.S. Census, UK Census, they ordinarily will provide information on the place of birth as well as the place of birth of the person's parents. So that's where you can find out whether somebody was born in Ireland or not, or whether their parents were born in Ireland. Unfortunately, the census data usually doesn't tell you what county in Ireland the person was born in. Occasionally it will. I know the UK census, especially the 1861 census, often lists the county that the person was born in Ireland. But that's unusual. It's unusual to find that information on a census. But you can, it's possible. Another thing you can do is once you find these people who probably emigrated out of Ireland and immigrated into the United States or wherever it is you live, see if you can find this person's naturalization papers, their immigration papers, their papers to become a citizen of the United States or the country that they're in. Sometimes those papers will list the county of origin in Ireland, and you might even get more than that. You might get lucky. Oftentimes they don't. It'll just say born in Ireland, but you never know, so you should check it to see. You can get naturalization papers off of a database in ancestry.com. Another thing you should do is see if you can locate your ancestor on a ship manifest showing their arrival in the United States or in whatever country they went to, in whatever city they landed in. The city they landed in isn't necessarily going to be the one that they settled in, but if you get the manifest, you see them on the manifest, at least you know what year and what day or month that they arrived. So you know what your range is in terms of trying to find them in Irish records. So if your ancestor arrived in the United States in 1836, you know you're not going to find them in a record in Ireland after 1836. So that helps. It helps narrow your search. All right, so go to the Irish records. Ancestry.com has a specific collection of records just for Ireland, just for this purpose of trying to find your Irish ancestors. That's really the best place to go to find this information, if you can find it. But you've got to understand something about these Irish records, and it's that it seems like everybody in Ireland used the same forenames or first names. So you just find tons and tons of Michaels and Marys and Catherines and Elizabeths and Johns and James and Patricks. And those are very common names. So it becomes very difficult to connect your ancestor with an Irish ancestor because they all use the same names and they name their kids the same things too. And their last names are also very common. You will find probably your Irish last name in maybe every county in Ireland uh, back when they were uh, uh, immigrating into the United States away from Ireland. So just because you have an Irish first name and an Irish last name doesn't mean you're going to find a record in Ireland that you know with a lot of certainty has to be your ancestor. You can find a particular Irish name and a particular last name, and probably in any county in Ireland. So that doesn't prove that that's your ancestor. And that's a big problem with Irish records. The names are very common and they're the same names used over and over and over and over again. And it's very difficult to figure out who is who's an Irish doppelganger, or who's living this parallel life to your ancestor who happens to also be, a Michael Mahoney or something like that. Um, so that's a real problem with Irish records. Another big problem with Irish records is a lot of them were lost. They don't exist. They're scattered. And among the ones that exist, they're not consistent. Some exist for much longer periods of time. They go back further than others. So it's a real, it's very scattershot trying to find your ancestor using Irish records because it's hit or miss. And you might get lucky and find it. But there's also an equal chance you won't. So just remember, Irish records aren't like researching records in the United States or records in the UK. The UK and the United States did a much, much better job maintaining records. So the Irish records are very difficult to really pinpoint people. Um, and likewise, you can't just rely on um, a date of birth, for instance, for a particular name in an Irish record, um, unless it matches exactly to the day and month, or it's in the exact location that you know your ancestor is going to be, because you're going to find a lot of doppelganger Irish people with the same name, born at the same time. And that's just a problem with Irish records. So, the biggest problem with Irish records is eliminating the doppelgangers, eliminating the people that just have the same name and the same parallel lives, but they're not your relatives. And until you can eliminate them and find the one that you can to show that this is in fact your relative, you haven't proven that this was your relative. So don't assume it was your relative. Yeah, there could be a lot of promising records in Ireland that may seem like your relative, but that's not enough to prove that it is your relative. You have to be much more rigorous than that, and that's very difficult with Irish records. Now, the thing with Irish records is they get a lot better after 1850. So, if your Irish ancestor left Ireland after 1850, you're going to have a much better chance of locating them in Ireland than if they left before then. If they left before then, it's you're limited to the sources that you can use, and it's much more scattershot and much more difficult to show that it is your ancestor. So, um, okay. Another thing is a lot of Irish emigrated due to the potato famine of the 1840s. This is called the Irish diaspora. And the Irish left Ireland and went to all sorts of places: the United States, the UK, Australia, Canada. And a lot of them left due to the potato famine. So a lot of Irish ancestors sort of disappear from the map of Ireland in that 1840s decade. Um, and that's usually related to a potato famine issue. But not necessarily. There were Irish who left for reasons that having nothing to do with the potato famine. It may have been due to a major economic depression in the area, or they were seeking work or more pay or a better life for themselves and their family, and they didn't want to be a potato farmer. That there were Irish who left for those reasons to seek their fortune because there wasn't any real opportunity for them in Ireland. So if your ancestor left after 1850, it's going to be a lot easier for you to find them. Ireland has some good census records from 1901 and 1911, but chances are your ancestors left before then, and those census records won't do you any good. If they did leave at those times, you're lucky. You'll have a much, much better chance of locating exactly where they came from. Of course, if you had ancestors that left Ireland after 1900, you should probably check with your family members first. Maybe they know where they came from in Ireland. Maybe the family history knows. So the major collection of Irish records for early times are they're all on ancestry.com. So I would suggest getting an ancestry.com account, or at least getting access to it from somebody who has an account, so you can search these records. So the major collections for the earlier times of Irish ancestry on ancestry.com include the Ireland Catholic Parish Registers from 1655 to 1915, the Ireland Select Births and Baptisms from 1620 to 1911, the Ireland Civil Registration Births Index from 1864 to 1958, the Ireland's Griffiths Valuations from 1847 to 1864, and finally the Ireland Tithe Allotment Books from 1805 to 1837. So those are all online at ancestry.com, and you can search them. However, because a lot of the Irish ancestors left before 1805, then the best resources will be the Catholic Parish Registers, Griffith Valuations, and the Tithe Allotment Books. Now, with the Catholic Parish Records, if your ancestor was Catholic, then they'll be in this. Maybe. If they weren't, then you may have to try a Church of Ireland record. And there's Griffith's Valuations, which is from 1847 to 1864. And finally, the tithe allotment books. Many Catholic parish records no longer exist, and those that do can vary greatly in terms of coverage dates, depending on the parish. The early ones are also written in Latin, so you can always go onto Google and search for some sort of translator from Latin to English, so you can type in the Latin and see what it says in English, unless you read Latin. um, So let's assume your ancestor left Ireland before 1850, and these may be your only sources. Well, when you're researching using these sources, if you're researching using the Catholic parish records, you should examine the original record, which is on microfiche. And you can usually get that from Ancestry.com, or each individual parish has access to the microfiche copies on the internet through registers.nli.ie. So you can go on there and you can find what county you're in, what parish, and you click on that parish, and you can get the microfiche, copies of the microfiche. You can look up the pages and the names yourself. It's not an easy process, but at least you can do it. And it's going to be hard to read. But I would always suggest looking at the source document instead of relying on the transcription, because transcriptions make mistakes. It's much better to see it for yourself, to see what it actually says and the spellings and the names. And the Catholic parishes, they'll have records of baptisms, marriages, and deaths. But each parish is different. Some parishes have no records. Some parishes have records, but they only start in, let's say, 1858 to 1872 or something like that. Some of the parishes go back earlier than that. Some of them don't, and some of the parishes don't have records at all. So it's very, very hit or miss when it comes to Catholic parish records. So once you know an exact county or townland where your ancestor came from, you can go to the parish in that townland or all the parishes in a particular county, although that's a lot. And then you can look up the parish records or focus on the parish records in those townlands or counties to see if you can find the names of people that have the same name as your ancestor. It may not be spelled exactly the same, and again, it may also be in Latin. So you have to take that into account when you're interpreting it. But you can use that to support your claim that this particular ancestor came from this county in Ireland. The Irish parish records are usually not a smoking gun because the Irish all used the same names. So, and they all had kids named the same, and they all used the same last names, and they all had kids at the same time as yours. There's lots of doppelgangers, so it's going to be very difficult to affirmatively prove with 100% certainty that this is your particular relative just from a Catholic parish record. Not to say that it can't be done if the names are unique enough and there's enough of indicia of reliability that this is your particular ancestor. It could be done. It's just not likely. So at best, usually it's just going to show you that there were people in the right area with names that match yours. So it's used to support your claim as opposed to really prove it. Griffith's valuations is great for locating specific individuals. The problem is it only goes from 1847 to 1864. So if your ancestor left before then, it won't help you much, except to confirm that there were certain surnames in the particular area you suspect your ancestor came from. So when you try to figure out where your ancestor came from, the first thing you normally do is gather some sort of evidence to create a target county where you think they might have come from. And then you can use this information to support your claim that they came from this county. Griffith's valuation is great because it'll give you the actual names, last names of not just the heads of households, but children as well. And once you can uh, match parents and children together in one location who have the correct names that you have, then you may very well have proven that these are in fact your ancestors, and this is where they lived at that point in time. So Griffiths is really great, but again, if your ancestor left Ireland before 1847, Griffiths not going to do you any good, except to show that there were people with that last name that you're looking for in that particular area at that time to confirm your suspicion that this might be the county they came from. Now, the last source is the Tithe Allotment books. Now, this goes from 1805 to 1837, and it includes the names of the heads of households for mostly poor people who had to pay the tithe to the government, which is a tax, basically, an ecclesiastical type of tax. So a lot of these people were farmers, poor people, but your ancestor may very well have been a poor person in Ireland because they left after all for some reason. If it was great for them there, they wouldn't have left. So it's a good chance your ancestor was poor in Ireland, and you may be in luck to be able to figure out where they came from. Um, the Tithe Allotment books will give you common names of people living all over Ireland at the time. So you run into the same problem that you run in with the valuation and the parish records, is that everybody uses the same names. Marys, Johns, Patricks, Hughes, similar last names, Irish last names, Ryan, Mooney, you name it. They're all over the place. Um, Seems like every county has got one of your relatives living in. So that doesn't prove that it was your relative. If somebody who has your same first and last name that you're looking for lived in every county in Ireland, that does not prove that that was your particular relative, because these people didn't move around that much. You're looking for an individual who lived in a particular county, and their family usually stayed in that county because these were tenant farmers, and they didn't have the wherewithal or the money to move around all over the place. So there's a good chance they stayed in the same location for centuries. So you can't have a relative all over Ireland. It's really your particular ancestor really is going to be located to one particular county and probably one particular parish in Ireland, if not townland. Okay, so be careful of the transcriptions for the tithe allotment books that you might find on Ancestry. They're full of mistakes. So what you should do is you can use them to locate a potential target, but then always look at the original or source document and check the transcription for yourself to make sure that it's correct. Because there's errors. There are errors, massive errors even. They can make errors in the date, even the county that this person is located in. So the good news is you can get the originals of the tithe allotment books free online from the National Archives of Ireland. So all you have to go to is titheallotmentbooks.nationalarchives.ie, and you can search them yourself and see the originals. by the Platinum Books, nationalarchives.ie. Unfortunately, if your Irish ancestor left before 1850, then you're going to have a hard time confirming their exact appearance in the Tithe of Platinum books or the parish records, because there will be many people in these collections with your ancestors' same name. And many will have relatives with the same names as your relatives. And you'll realize that once you start searching these records. So, what do? Well, there's more than one way to skin a cat. For ancestors that left prior to 1850, you will have to use other techniques to confirm their location in Ireland. And I'll give you some of those techniques. First, perhaps you can find other relatives who left Ireland later than your target relative. Relatives who left after 1850. That'll make it easier for you to find where they were from in Ireland. And it's a pretty good presumption that wherever they were from is the same place that your other relative was from. A second technique you can use is perhaps your relative or one of their other relatives specifically wrote the county of origin on their tombstone or grave marker. That does happen. You can go to a website called findagrave.com and you might be able to find your particular relative, and you may get lucky and they may have put it right on their tombstone. Of course, a lot of these people were poor and they don't have tombstones or grave markers, but some of them do, and it may be on there. And it may be a relative who, they died in the United States and their grave is in the United States, or it's in the UK, and they earned a lot of money while they were in the UK or the United States, and they had enough to buy a nice tombstone, and it's got the county name on it. You might get lucky. So findagrave.com. Ancestry also has links to that. Again, maybe the county was noted on a census, such as the U.S. Census or the UK Census. A lot of Irish um, immigrants went to the UK, especially the poorer ones, because they didn't. I guess because they didn't have the money to go somewhere else. The children, a lot of the Irish children from the escaping the potato famine, went to the UK, and that 1861 UK census does have a lot of indications of the exact county of origin. So check that out. You might get lucky and find the exact county, quite possibly the townland name too. Um, Another place you can look is the death certificate. Uh, your ancestor may have been born in Ireland but died here in the United States, or died in the UK, or died in Australia or Canada or somewhere else. And the death certificate may very well give you the county or even the townland of where your ancestor was born. So check that out as well. Oftentimes it doesn't indicate that, but it can. It depends on how much information whoever filled out the death certificate like to gather from a relative. Another thing you can do is you can try to triangulate the names of your relatives born in Ireland on parish records with known maiden names of ancestors, children's names, and dates of birth, and then confirm or narrow this suspicion using the tithe books. So if the names are uncommon enough and you know a maiden name, you might find a marriage record with the correct last name of the man and the correct maiden name of the woman, and their first names match. And that may be enough to triangulate to prove that this is, in fact, your relative, especially if the names are uncommon. and especially if those names really don't appear anywhere else in that particular parish. That may be enough to convince you, yes, this is in fact um, my ancestor. Another thing you can do is, once you have that real strong confirmation, you go back to the allotment books and see if those last names appear in the location you suspect they're from. And if they are, there's more confirmation that at least those names appear there. So this couple from those families could have met and got married. When these people pick spouses, they're picking spouses from the same place they live at, generally speaking, or at least in the same church that they go to. They're not going great distances to find spouses, so it's usually a local. So the local names are the people they're going to pick spouses from. So if those local names or those maiden names are there, that's a good indication that you got the right area. You got to remember, back before 1850, you're talking about, there were no cars. You're talking about people walking or taking a horse or some sort of animal, and that's how they got around. So you didn't go very far in those days. So you're not going 50 miles down the road to some party and you meet your future wife. That didn't happen back then, really. So it's going to be a local girl or a local guy. Another method is the DNA method. If you get an Ancestry account, you get a DNA test with Ancestry, and your results are given to you in your Ancestry account. Ancestry will show you other Ancestry members who have a genetic match with you. And then what you can do is you can search their family trees to look for people with the same last name that you're targeting. And if they have that in their family tree, you can look up their family tree and see who that person is. And maybe it's somebody you recognize, maybe it's not, but there's a good chance that that is your ancestor. If it's the last name you're looking for, if it's the last name off of your family tree, you're related to them, and you see that last name on another ancestry member's family tree, there's a good chance that that's your ancestor too, even though you may have never heard of that ancestor before. So then what you can do is you can look at that family tree and see if they traced it back to Ireland. Or maybe they didn't trace it all the way back to Ireland, but they're not that good a genealogist, and maybe you can take that other person and trace it back to Ireland, whereas they weren't, they didn't have the skill to be able to do that. But a thing you got to be careful of is when you use the DNA technique, you got to make sure that the family tree of the member you're using was done accurately. So you have to double check their sources, double check how they drew the conclusion that they were related to this particular person, because people make mistakes. So you can be very disappointed to find out that their family tree isn't worth anything because they didn't base it on accurate sources. And another thing you want to do is check the rest of the names on their family tree to make sure that there aren't names you recognize, because it's possible that there's another, your genetic link to them isn't through this particular target, but it's through some other target. So if you can exclude the other names on their tree as being your known relatives, that just makes it far more likely that the common name is in fact a relative of yours. So if you find the name of a relative on somebody else's tree with the last name of the target you're after, and they did their genealogy, or you do their genealogy for them, and you prove an origin in Ireland, you just proved your own origin, because chances are whoever was on their tree may be just a cousin, a brother, sister, or something like that of the one on your tree, and they, in all likelihood, came from the same place or the same town. So you've proven your own ancestry by proving somebody else's, or research, or finding somebody else's, how they traced it back to Ireland. Another technique you can use is to find the target's obituary in the newspaper. Um, these obituaries can be very short, one line that just says the person died. That's not very helpful. They can be a paragraph, maybe just give you the name of a few relatives, where the funeral is going to be, what day they died, their names. Maybe you get a maiden name out of it. It can be useful. But sometimes they'll tell you what county they're from, or even more. And some people have very elaborate obituaries, depending on how wealthy they were, which may give you their biographical information, including where they came from in Ireland. So you can get lucky that way. So always check obituaries. And, you know, finding a relative of your target is just as good as finding the target's origin, because chances are it's the same thing. So any person who you know who's related to you who came from Ireland, if you could find out where that person came from in Ireland, you found out where your person came from Ireland as well. It's automatic. So you want to check out everybody that you have, who you know came from Ireland, to see their obituaries, or see if you can trace them back to some place in Ireland, because proving one proves them all. Uh, and the more people you can look at, the better your odds are that you're going to find the sources that allow you to trace back a particular county location for your relatives. So if you want to do some database searches on newspapers, you can go to some place like newspapers.com. And they'll have newspapers that go back hundreds of years. So you can find very, very old obituaries in a database like newspapers.com. Ancestry has access to some of those databases um, as well, but this is much more extensive. Another technique you can use is the Ancestry.com. If you do a DNA test with them, will give you an ancestry map. It'll show you a map of Ireland, and it'll have